A good place to start here, Alex. So in 2008, the editor-in-chief of the Gilman News published a poem called Drowsy.
Okay.
Do you remember this?
Barely.
I'll give you a little bit of it.
Yeah.
You're sore, can't take it anymore. Your forearms cramp from typing. Are you hungry, or is it just another excuse to stop? You won't, you can't. This poem reads like someone trying to outgrind exhaustion. And it seems like since a young age, you've always had this level of deep discipline, realizing that hard work is the goal. If hard work is the goal, what is the path to getting there?
I think it is the path. So I think the point of it is that the process itself, like the thing that you do every day, if you can measure success by how closely you emulate the path that you want to follow, then rather than winning once every 2 years, once every decade, when you achieve whatever, destination you're quote walking towards, then you can win every day and really every moment, as long as you're staying on that path. And so I think that's how I think about work. That's wild that you found that poem.
You had a few others in there. One was called Ice Cream, about a girl who you saw eating ice cream. And it made you sad.
Seems on brand.
Yeah, I think we also found some old yearbook photos. It's
that's
pretty entertaining.
wild.
But
Hopefully you didn't find, never mind. Well, we had Luigi, whatever the shooter is. He was valedictorian of many years after me.
Really?
Yeah, Gilman.
That's fascinating. Were you
apparently just turned out some very sad guys.
Were you valedictorian of your class?
No, I wasn't.
Gotcha. Okay.
I was top 10%.
On hard work, today you preach discipline and consistency, but also sustainability. How do you know if you're working too hard?
So, too hard's such a hard concept to like I would be like, what does too hard even mean? I think that you have a rate of output that occurs over a period of time. And if the rate of output decreases kind of precipitously at some point, then you're not being effective anymore. And so like on a micro level, even hour to hour throughout a day, your output will go down, and then you have to sleep at some point. Then you wake up and then your output goes up again. And so I think like the idea of being burned out, like I don't think anyone's like, people don't burn out when they're playing video games. Not really. I mean, maybe some people, but like for the most part, you can like kind of keep doing it. And I think that burnout just means that the reward for the work that you're doing has either you have habituated to that reward, so you've gotten used to it, so it no longer really rewards you anymore, or the cadence of that reward, which is meaningful, has continued to extend in terms of how frequently you get rewarded, which are both two different ways of basically saying the same thing, which is just you're not getting out of it what you wanted to get out of it. And so I think that is when people quote get burned out. I don't think it has anything to do with the amount of work that you're doing. So I think it's about what's happening around you while you're working rather than the work itself. Because there are I like looking at things across like many thousands of years. And so even the idea of a 40-hour work week is a pretty modern invention. And if you look at, even a few hundred years ago, people just worked every day. And it wasn't like, oh my God, that guy's so hardcore. It's just like he just worked every day because that was just kind of the expectation, and you just like had to live and had to survive. And if he had enough to eat for a day off, he could probably do that if he wanted to. And so I think about that a lot, which is like a lot of these confines are self-inflicted. And I think laddering up the belief set to like, does this serve me? And so the idea of like, how do you develop work ethic? I think the big thing is like, it's not really developing work ethic. It's doing the things that you have been rewarded for doing in the past and removing things that you don't enjoy as much. And then it gets easier to do more because you enjoy doing the thing you're doing. Now, let me be clear. I don't like, there's overhead. Of course, there's things that I do that I don't enjoy doing, but there's food that you eat that you don't immediately like, but maybe you like dessert. And that's like, so it's really just like, again, it's a cadence of reinforcement. It's like, how many times am I being reinforced over a period of time? And maybe if anything, the thing that gets developed is that you develop a history of being rewarded for delaying gratification over a period of time. But, it's like, it's like, it's weird. Like I get a lot of, I mean, even like the intro that you gave, it's like, I get a lot of press, if you could call it that, or like flowers for having, huge work ethic. But like, it just doesn't feel, and this isn't like, oh, I do what I love. I'm miserable all the time. Like, it's like, there's plenty of times I'm miserable for extended periods of time. I just like, don't really know what else I would do. And so work is just kind of like my default setting. And so people are like, oh my God, that guy works 7 days a week on end. And it's like, yeah, but it's like, so have many people. I'll give you a different frame to like contextualize this. So we have a team here, we have an advisory practice, and for the team to spend all day with clients in person, it's like, oh my God, this is exhausting, and we have to present and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, well, I mean, teachers present in front of groups all day, every day, all the time. And it's not like a big deal. It's just like, that's just how it is. And so just reframing something that we see as the big thing, as something that somebody else in a different context does all the time, is probably the most regular practice that I do, which is like, how can in what universe would this not be hard? In what universe would this be normal? And well, then I'll just live in that universe. Make sense?
Yeah. That's
kind of how I think about it.
I guess to go off what you're saying, I think it's common sentiment preached online, like I wake up at 4, stop working at 10 p.m.
Sure.
And I guess what I'm curious is, it seems like you believe that people have throughout history worked for extended periods of time, but is that on mentally strenuous tasks necessarily? Because I think of this podcast, for instance, and you might get diminishing returns, but if I recorded 10 podcasts in a day or 20 podcasts in a day, I'm probably going to do it differently than how I would do it if I were doing one in a day. You might put different types of energy. It might be more passive. You might be a little less active listening. So do you believe that you can still build that muscle of working for like mentally strenuous tasks?
Absolutely.
Really?
No question. No hesitation.
Even for writing, like you've like gone like 16
Absolutely.
hours. Really?
Absolutely.
And do you have any advice for building that metric?
Doing it more. Like, I mean, 100%. It's repetition. It's volume. Like what you just like, fundamentally, if we describe a behavior set within a given condition, then it's a skill that we can develop. And we develop skills through modeling, and we develop through role playing with basically seeing what other people do and then doing it ourselves. And so like, it doesn't matter what you're trying to learn. If you like, and it's just that there are some skills that people think reading, people think math, people think like public speaking, like these are all skills, but it's like, in what way does podcasting not fall into that category? In what way does having a conversation not fall into that category? Of course it does. And so I don't see it as any different. The only thing is that you want to have some sort of feedback loop so you can make it even better. But even just the fact of just like, after every podcast, if you had 5 minutes, you're like, okay, what did I do well? What can I do better? And then the next day, reviewing all the podcasts and then doing it again, like eventually you would no longer get fatigued from it, because you'd habituate. And so for that one podcast, if you only do one a month, you're probably gonna have, your adrenals will dump while you're having the podcast. You have, anxiety, your heart rate goes up, you start sweating. But if you do it all the time, then it no longer creates an adrenal response because you were just accustomed to doing it. And so, I mean, my goal is just to go through the habituation cycle as fast as humanly possible. So I just get used to it. But like, I'll do a consulting day for 12 straight hours. And I'm pretty fresh at the end. I enjoy doing it. I like doing it. And so, and I'm not saying that like, that's how I've always been. It's just like, I've done it over time. And, answering questions even ad hoc, it's like, how can you answer questions? It's like, well, I'll tell you 2 different stories. So when I gave my first public speech, that wasn't in high school. When I was in high school, I was really nervous because I didn't know the subject matter that well, because it was, Civil War, whatever, right? Or, pro or con, affirmative action, whatever. You have to make some debate. Fast forward, I get on stage. My first stage I ever spoke on as a business person had 1,200 people in the audience. First stage ever. And I remember as I was walking up on stage, I was like, why am I not nervous right now? It was like very weird. I was like, I should be nervous. Why am I not nervous? I've been nervous all the other times I've spoken. And so I thought about it, and it was, I have been doing 8 public speaking things a day for years, because at my gym, I had a microphone, same headset, big speakers that I could hear myself on. And I had a bunch of adults in a room that I had to tell what to do. And I did that every single hour on the hour, 8 hours a day. And then I still ran the business on top of that. And so I'd done that for years. And so when I got up on stage, I was like, oh, I'm just telling another group of people while I have a headset on about something that I already know about. And so that was kind of the making where you start to have, domain generalizations like, okay, something I did here also applies over here. And so it doesn't need to be a big deal. And so that kind of pattern recognition of like, what other time have I done something like this that it wasn't a big deal? Why can't I just use that as the frame of reference for how I'm going to think about what I'm doing right now?
That's a really good answer.
Thanks.
You kind of have this philosophy of people like to do things that they're good at, right? Mm-hmm. And that kind of comes from building volume over time.
Yeah.
Is it your belief that most people know what they're good at?
No. Well, I'll say this. You do what you have been rewarded for doing in the past. And that is kind of like my North Star of everything. And that's basically the behaviorist view of the world, which is people do what they've been rewarded for doing in the past. So, quote, bad people just behave that way because they've been rewarded for behaving in a, quote, bad way in the past. And so they do it. And if they've been punished for doing that, and punish doesn't mean from an outside source, it's just something happened that they didn't want to have happen, an aversive stimulus. And so they would stop doing that, right? And the difficulty is attribution around the skill. So it's basically, where's the causal relationship coming from? And typically people will look at what happened before something, like what's the trigger, and that people use that word. But the trigger is false. It's really, the trigger is just the circumstance that gets created that repeats a behavior you've done in the past that you've been rewarded for. And so I gave this example when I was talking to Graham, but I'll bring it up because I think it's useful. It's like, Layla and I would get into some sort of spat about something, whatever. And I realized that I wouldn't get into a spat, but like if she was crying about something, and it didn't have to be related to me, but she could just be crying for whatever reason. I realized that I tended to get angry when she would cry. And she was like, why do you get angry at me when I'm crying? And I would get angry, and then she would stop crying, because then she would get defensive, but the crying would stop. And so she inadvertently rewarded me for getting angry at her in the condition of her crying. So the trigger for me getting angry is her crying. Is it? Or is it the fact that when I have gotten angry in the past, she stopped? And so like, okay, well, why did you get angry the first time? Because that would be the key question. And so what ends up happening is that if you encounter an obstacle that you don't know how to overcome, you do basically something called an extinction burst, which is a series of different behaviors to try and elicit the desired result. And so the easiest way of thinking about this is like a 4-year-old kid who's at a candy, the candy aisle right before they check out, and they say, I want a candy. And so the first thing they'll do is say, Mom, I want a candy. And then the mom says no. And then the child changes behavior and says, please, pretty please, blah, 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 blah. They beg. That doesn't work. So then they shout and scream. And so all they're doing is basically flipping through the cards of behavior. They don't do this consciously, but they're just flipping through the cards of behavior until one of them gets them what they want. And so then when a parent has a child, for example, that has tantrums repeatedly, it means that at some point earlier on, they had a tantrum and then they got what they wanted. And so what you did is you rewarded tantrum having rather than rewarding non-tantrum having, right? And so when I think about this with regards to, what was the original question? So I can find my way back.
Do most people know what they're good at?
Yeah. And so the thing is that we have been rewarded for doing things in the past. And so when people are like, why are you the way that you are? I would just say like, I have been rewarded in the past for behaving this way. And so I just continue to seek out those rewards. And so these behaviors have worked for me. And the thing is that these skills generalize across domains. So like working hard, for example, it's like if you do something where you have an extended period of time where you have effort before you have a reward and it works out well, then I'm more likely to repeat that behavior in another condition. And so people are excellent at Netflix and chilling. People are excellent at delaying tasks. People are excellent at avoiding confrontation. Why? Because they've been rewarded for doing so. And the problem with it is that there's multiple different types of reward that happen over different timelines. And if this sounds complex, it's like, that's why it's a whole field of study. But basically you have latency is the biggest confounder for a causal relationship around a behavior. Meaning, Facebook can addict you because there's a little light that turns red, but it's immediate. So they will better addict people to Facebook by giving that dot immediately than saying, I'll give you $1 in 30 days. Now, the people who have been rewarded in the past for waiting over a period of time after working would do better with the delayed reward. But most people don't have that kind of reward cycle. They've never done anything for a long period of time. And so I think the laddered up question is like, how do you get people to just try that first time where they're just willing to push out when they get rewarded for the work they're putting in? And the answer is, I don't know. I think at some point people call it chance, call it, they read some article and they decide to actually try something for an extended period of time. But I guess I would reject the original premise of the question, which is I think many people are good at many things. They're just not good at the things they want to be good at.
I guess to get more specific, how can people identify their competitive edge? Because an example I think of with your content, for instance, you run like a big media channel, and if you're posting, let's say you're looking at results and you think, well, motivational content seems to be doing well. Let's push out more motivational content. But it's not like maybe you don't consider, and I'm assuming you do, that maybe it does well because Alex has a nice soothing voice. Maybe it's because the visual hook is the way the set looks. A lot of people don't consider the multiplicity of factors. Like, how can you get better at identifying those things?
I mean, how do you figure out what you're good at?
Yeah, because there's volume and then there's also reflection on the volume. And how do you get better at the reflection portion?
Yeah, so it's volume times feedback loops. So if you think about skill acquisition in general, now this is relatively well documented, but if I want to learn any new skill, so rather than saying what am I good at, I think it's sometimes more valuable to say what do I want to get good at? Now, people have quote proclivities, or they're like, oh, I'm naturally predisposed to these things. Maybe, but you can't control your genetics and maybe you don't know. And maybe it was just a nurture thing that earlier on, I remember I had this, and I will loop around to the answer, but I was in college, and one of my favorite professors, he taught a class called systematic inquiry, which is basically how do you ask questions and answer them, which is great. And he's a super nurture over nature guy in terms of his thought process around the world, and I tend to skew more towards the nurture side as well. And he said, all the things that you guys think you're naturally good at, you're not naturally good at, you just got good at them earlier. And so I was like, I've always been really good at languages. And I was like, I feel like that's something. And he just looked at me and he was like, I mean, do you have a parent that speaks another language, or there's someone in your life? And I was like, oh yeah, both my parents are bilingual. And I spoke French as my first language. And he was like, why are we even talking? And it was it felt so, because I didn't see I was like, it was so natural to me that I didn't even think about it. But the very first, my existence was two languages. And so incorporating third, or even seeing English differently, was something that, quote, came natural to me, but it was just I had a different skill set that was repeated earlier on. And so to the original question in terms of skill acquisition, it's you have a volume of activity that you're doing. So if I want to learn how to, play the trumpet, it'd be I'm going to play the trumpet for an hour, and then I'm going to look at other people who play the trumpet and compare what my notes sound like to compare what their notes sound like. And the fastest way to do that is to have an expert tutor. I'm a huge fan of tutoring. It is the fastest way to learn. The second fastest is in small groups, and the third is to join a community of people who already have the same skill, and then you can basically learn through osmosis. And when I say learn through osmosis, it's just learn through observation of the small skills and skills that they do on a regular basis that increase the likelihood they get what they want. But if you I'll say one thing, if you want to learn something, whatever it is, the fastest thing to do is go into a community of people who already know how to do that thing well. It's a bar none, fastest thing. You'll get many different feedback loops from many different sources. You'll be able to tease out what are the few truths rather than the mysticism that's kind of associated with the whole space, because every space has mysticism around it and magic, but there's usually a few core truths that are always true amongst all people for the skill.
That makes a lot of sense.
We're going skills. We're going, we're going super amorphous.
On the reward portion you were speaking about, the ability to kind of wait before you get the result. How do you decide an opportunity is worth 10 years of your time?
I think even in asking the question, it's a question that I probably wouldn't ask. And so maybe there is some outcome that would be material, but immediately I go to what would my days look like? And I tend to reverse from that. So it's like, if an opportunity, like, how would I determine that an opportunity is worth doing? Well, maybe there's many different big opportunities that exist, but which is the one that has the most days in a row that I would like to live? And then I'll pursue that one, because I think the likelihood that I stick with it is pretty high if I like what I'm doing every day.
That's a great framework. And how could people maybe know what their days would look like?
I mean, I think asking people and observing people. So people who are already doing whatever you're looking for, that's one. The best is observation, because someone's ability to communicate what they do and your ability to comprehend it is basically two filters it has to go through that are different from reality. Observation is just one. And so it's just you direct into your brain, right? And so I think observation itself is also a skill of, like, if you want to learn if I use sales a lot because it's just such an easy skill for people to understand. It's like, if I want to be the best salesperson, I can ask the best salesperson what they do, but some of the best salespeople aren't even conscious of what they do. And so observing what they do oftentimes has taught me significantly more than asking. And shoot, we have to do this with our own videos. It's like, what makes these videos better than other videos? Well, I did something differently, so let's look at what I did. And a lot of times the excellence just comes from observing random chance in a recorded setting. It's like every time we make any piece of content, anytime you have any sales call, any conversation, any presentation, any email, any whatever, you're rolling a dice where you're trying to control as many variables as you can, but there's always going to be new variables. And so when you have these kind of outliers or these above average outcomes, it's like, what was different that happened here, and how can I repeat it again? And so that's because I believe that prediction is control. And so let me hedge that. But basically, if you can absolutely predict what someone is going to do because you understand all the variables, then you control that person. So again, people don't like that. It's a very no one likes the idea of being controlled, but I just like to use this as a natural hypothetical example. So if I'm in an auditorium of 100 people and I'm on stage and I'm speaking, if I said, who here thinks that I can get everybody to get naked, right? Most people will probably be like, no, I don't think that's going to happen. But what you'd have to do is you would just lock all the doors, and then you'd crank the heat to 200, and people would get naked. And so if I control the variables, you control the behavior. And so trying to increase the likelihood that a certain action happens in the world is just really, how well do I understand all the variables that contribute to that outcome? And the difficulty is that there's usually just a lot of variables. And so I think mastery over time is just understanding how to influence each of the variables that increase the likelihood that the desired outcome happens. And when you have that, then people are like, man, he's so good at telling the future. This investor is so good at predicting these outcomes. It's just he has identified the vast majority of the variables that predict. And so his predictions are more accurate than other people's. And that's kind of at least how I see it. And I could be totally wrong. Let me give you something useful for everyone. So I deal with obviously a lot of employees, founders, etc., throughout my days. And one of the frames that comes up a lot is so-and-so isn't, doing what I want them to do, or I have to have this hard conversation with somebody. Most times people will try to have the conversation to make themselves feel better. But if we flip the question to, what would I like to have happen, number one, and then number two, what increases the likelihood that occurs, you do a very different set of behaviors. So I'll give you an example. I had a friend of mine who's a pretty big influencer creator, whatever you want to call it. You would know they are. And she had basically a beef with a different creator who had stolen some stuff or something like that. And so she was like, hey, what do you think I should say to this guy? And I was like, well, what do you want to have happen? And she thought for a second, and she didn't really have a clear answer. I was like, well, if I were you, I would want to decrease the likelihood this occurs in the future. Does that sound like a fair outcome? She was like, yeah. And I was like, okay, well, does you yelling at him for it decrease the likelihood that occurs in the future? Or does he just do it and then he's just not friends with you? And she was like, huh. And what happens is oftentimes you go through enough of those loops and you're like, maybe I just don't really gain anything from saying anything. I'm like, yeah, probably. And so I have an internal joke with my closest friend, Dr. Kashi, which is, we call it the undefeated champion of the world, which is the third path, which is do nothing. And so many times, when you run through all the scenarios, most of the times we just want to do something because we want to feel better. But it actually doesn't increase the likelihood that we want to have happens. Most times you'll just increase the likelihood for retaliation. And so me yelling at someone just increases the likelihood that they yell back at me or that they try to do something to counter control me. And so it's like, well, I would rather just like not play. This game has prizes and I don't want any of them.
When is the time to play?
When there's prizes you want to win and you think that there's a path that you have a high likelihood of winning them. My dad used to say this to me when I was really young, and I don't think I really fully grasped it until I was older. But he said, I don't play unless I know I can win. And I think part of it may be because he just didn't want to play games with me, who knows? But that sounds ugly. No, my dad's great. But the thing that I took that like later on, and I took that as like, one, many games are not worth playing. And two, if you are going to play a game, understand the players and understand the rules so that you can increase the likelihood that you win, right? And if you can come into a game saying like, well, obviously there's risk that's always involved. There's things that happen, but I think from the moniker perspective of like that saying, I think I've carried that with me. Like, why would I play unless I know there's a strong chance that I can win? And if I don't think there's a strong chance that I can win, how can I increase my odds? Like what unfair advantages can I create for myself? And if I don't know it, then I don't understand the game well enough, which means I probably shouldn't play until I understand it.
I want to go back to something you said a minute before, because last interview I asked Layla if there were any unexpected consequences of becoming famous on the internet, and she basically hinted at no, besides the hate portion. And
Alex Hormozi is not just another entrepreneur chasing success. He's a man who redefined what it means to work, to suffer, and to win. Every single day, Alex Hormozi earns around $700,000 from his portfolio of companies. But what makes his story remarkable isn't the number. It's the journey that shaped the man behind it. From a young age, Alex Hormozi was taught to follow the traditional path, the corporate dream, the safe route, the scripted life that his father envisioned for him. But that script didn't lead to fulfillment. It led to confusion, exhaustion, and a haunting sense that something inside him was broken. Yet, Alex Hormozi discovered that he wasn't broken. He simply had the wrong words, the wrong definitions for struggle, success, and purpose. When 2025 began, Alex Hormozi called it the worst year of the last 8. 8 lawsuits, endless pressure, and moments where even he questioned his endurance. But instead of crumbling, Alex Hormozi reminded himself of one truth. Life isn't fair, and it doesn't have to be. Fairness isn't the point. Discipline is. Alex Hormozi explains that motivation isn't something you wait for. It's the equal opposite of deprivation. You don't need perfect conditions to move forward. You need hunger. You need to use whatever fuel you have, revenge, pain, frustration, and turn it into motion. If you need revenge to succeed, Alex Hormozi says, then use it. Just don't stay there forever. Let it be the spark, not the prison. Long before the fame, Alex Hormozi wrote a poem called Drowsy. It was about exhaustion, pain, and the relentless push to keep going when your body says, enough. That poem, written in his youth, became a prophecy of his philosophy, the belief that the path itself is the goal. Alex Hormozi teaches that if you can learn to measure success by how faithfully you follow your process, you can win every single day, not just when you reach the finish line. When asked how to know if you're working too hard, Alex Hormozi challenges the question itself. What does too hard even mean, he asks. Burnout, he says, doesn't come from the work. It comes from the absence of reward. It comes from losing sight of why you started. When the reward disappears, fatigue takes over. When the meaning fades, exhaustion wins. Alex Hormozi reminds us that people didn't always complain about working every day. Centuries ago, work wasn't a choice. It was survival. We've created modern limits that didn't exist before. We've become fragile by questioning effort. For Alex Hormozi, hard work isn't punishment. It's identity. He often laughs when people call him a machine for working 7 days a week. So did farmers. So did builders. So did every generation before us, Alex Hormozi says. It's not superhuman. It's normal when you stop glorifying comfort. Alex Hormozi also breaks down the secret of discipline. It's not about building some mythical work ethic. It's about doing what you've been rewarded for in the past and removing what doesn't serve you. The more you align your effort with what gives you meaning, the easier it becomes to do more. Still, Alex Hormozi admits that discomfort never disappears. Misery sometimes stays, but purpose makes it tolerable. He says work is simply his default setting. He doesn't need to feel motivated to work. He works because it's who he is. One of the most powerful lessons Alex Hormozi shares is that mental endurance is trainable. Just as the body adapts to stress, the mind adapts to focus. You can train yourself to work for hours on mentally demanding tasks simply by doing it repeatedly. Repetition creates strength. Alex Hormozi says he's written for 16 hours straight, consulted for 12 hours in a row, and still felt fresh. Not because he's different, but because he's conditioned. The same way an athlete builds stamina, he built focus. Every podcast, every meeting, every long workday was his gym. He compares this to public speaking. The first time he spoke to an audience of 100-200 people, he wasn't nervous. Why? Because for years, Alex Hormozi had spoken into a microphone every day at his gym, leading classes, giving directions, communicating with energy. When he stepped on stage, it was just another rep. Discipline had turned fear into familiarity. Alex Hormozi believes that the more you expose yourself to discomfort, the more normal it becomes. What once terrified you becomes routine. What once felt impossible becomes your baseline. But one of the most insightful ideas Alex Hormozi shares is about reward loops. He says we all do what we've been rewarded for in the past, whether that's working hard, procrastinating, or avoiding confrontation. Every behavior survives because it has been rewarded at some point. He gives the example of a child throwing tantrums. When a parent gives in, the child learns that tantrums work. The same principle applies to adults. Every bad habit, every fear, every hesitation, it's all behavior we've been rewarded for before. The solution? Redefine what your brain sees as rewarding. Train it to find satisfaction in discipline, not escape. Alex Hormozi says most people don't know what they're good at because they haven't stuck with anything long enough to discover it. Success requires patience, the ability to delay gratification long enough for the reward to appear. Most people never get there because they quit before the breakthrough. That's why Alex Hormozi insists that repetition, consistency, and discomfort are not enemies. They're the path. You can't find freedom without first mastering discipline. You can't enjoy success until you've learned to endure monotony. In the end, Alex Hormozi's story isn't about money or status. It's about discovering that freedom comes not from avoiding work, but from loving it. That the true reward isn't external validation, it's self-mastery. And that's the real secret Alex Hormozi lives by. When you stop chasing comfort and start embracing challenge, you become unstoppable.